Hi everyone, my name's Danny Ferrier and I'm a leadership coach based in Nelson, New Zealand. And today I'd love to talk about why it's so important to nip behaviour in the bud when you notice it in your culture. Because people are people and they're going to behave in a way that is in line with them until they get told otherwise. And as leaders, it's our responsibility to nip behavior in the bud so that you benefit the whole of the culture and keep the company moving forward in the direction that you want it to go in, because it's your responsibility and your company. So today I'm going to be talking about why it's important to nip those behaviors in the bud and then give you a really easy to follow pathway to make those conversations a little easier. Because we all have resistance to these conversations. And what comes up when you go to say something to someone and give them some honest feedback is there's a fear of being judged. And quite often, if you're a people pleaser like I used to be, there's a fear of not being liked. And these two major fears hold us back from being able to say what needs to be said and ultimately impacts on the culture and your organization negatively over a long period of time. Now, I'll share with you one extremely important point of why you need to prioritize saying what needs to be said. If you've got Johnny over here and you've noticed that he's done something wrong or that he's maybe done something in a way that isn't in line with the company, and you don't say something, Jill, who's over here, she sees the situation playing out and you haven't said anything. And so not only does this person not learn a different way of doing it, but this person over here also loses trust within you as the leader to say what needs to be said. And people can feel what's sort of right or wrong or what needs to be said. And when you take the time to have a conversation with that person about the behavior that you've noticed, then you will build trust within the organization that things are being done about what is not in line with the company, and that you're being proactive about helping mentor people to show up in a way that's going to serve the whole team. Does that make sense? So it's not only about this person and their growth and understanding, but it's also the impacts it has on the team and the overall organization. One of the things that I've noticed time and time again is that leaders don't do this because they are afraid of what that person is going to say, or they're going to get pushback from that person. Now, everybody has defense mechanisms in place, and these defense mechanisms are to protect us from feeling vulnerable. And if somebody's done something wrong or if they're getting called out, it's a vulnerable thing because they feel bad, or they don't feel bad and they feel defiant, or they just didn't know and it wasn't in their awareness. But their reaction to you giving feedback is actually not your responsibility. But what stops so many leaders from giving feedback is that pushback. But when you can be aware of that, when you can acknowledge that actually it's okay that that person has reacted because you expect that they might, then you can have extra capacity to allow that reaction to play out and still give them feedback anyway. And as a leader, it's not necessary that you are liked in every moment, because you're trying to teach people how to value growth. And when they don't value growth, they're going to be giving you those reactions, and they're not going to like you in the moment. And when you are able to do that in a loving way that helps them see that growth is important, and they start to learn to value growth, then they will love you for being the leader that had the guts to be able to say it in the moment, even when it was hard, right? Unconsciously, they want to grow, but they've got these defense mechanisms playing out that stop them from taking on board feedback. But if you're able to acknowledge that and then say it with love and care, because you do actually want that person to grow, then they will start to ease up their reactions, and eventually it will get easier. And the ideal would be for you to give feedback so often and nip all the behavior that isn't in line with the business in the bud immediately, and people start to become hungry for growth. They start to say, how could I do it another way? Or what do you think about this? And that really is a thriving organization. When everybody values growth, they're setting goals, they're showing up like they mean it, they are taking on board feedback just like that. But most of the organizations I'm working with are starting from not really giving their team members any feedback, and most of the time they don't have goals in place, so they're not really valuing growth from the get-go. So I can't empathize enough how friggin' hard it is to get from this place where there's no conversations happening about growth to get to this place where everybody's taking on board feedback consistently. So that it needs to be done in a delicate way initially, and then you can start sort of revving up the way that you give feedback. And when you're giving feedback at the beginning, when you're making these changes in the organization, that would be the time where you take someone aside and you say, hey, can I just have a quick chat with you about something? Because then you're not embarrassing them in front of the team, you're making sure that it's the right time for them, and you're checking in with them if it's okay that you give feedback. But once you start doing this more and more, you start to condition the team that they know that you're going to give feedback more consistently, and then they will slowly get to this place where they're really taking it on board. Does that make sense? So initial soft approach, a little bit softer, and then a little bit more, hey, come on, I've talked to you about this, and then, hey, let's talk about how we can do this another way. So let's talk about exactly what we have to do and think about in those conversations to make them effective. And what I love about the way that I teach this is that when you're giving somebody feedback, your intention is pure. So you're not making it about the business. If I went in and I said, hey, John, you need to do this differently because you're impacting the business and it's hurting my bottom line. John doesn't care about your bottom line. He just wants to do his job. But when you say, hey, John, I'd love to talk to you about something. I've noticed that you've been doing X, Y, and Z. Can you share with me what your thinking was behind that? I really want to help you grow. So let's look at how you can do this in another way. Is that okay with you? So you're making it about John. You're not making it about how John impacts the business initially. Of course he is, but you want to work with them so that they know that your intention is about them and their growth. And then they'll take it on board. And those defense mechanisms that initially might pipe up are able to be sort of neutralized because they can see that you care. So when you're starting out this conversation, remember you've got to be permissive. with people. You've got to ask them, is it okay? So I would say, hey, is it okay if we have a quick chat about what I've just noticed? So you've got their emotional buy-in, and they've said, yes, it's okay. It's not, I've got a meeting in 5 minutes, this is not a good time. You've opened up the door to know if they're ready to have this conversation. Then you're in your office or you've gone for a walk with them. Doesn't have to be in a formal situation. You can just say, hey, let's go for a drive or whatever. Then you want to make sure that the first step you're doing is to acknowledge them. Because those defense mechanisms might be up. Or you see them working really hard and it's just one extra thing on top of that. You want to give them some acknowledgement. So you might say something like this. Hey Joe, I love how you've been working so hard on this project, and it might be a little bit hard for you to take this on board, but what I would like to have a conversation with you about is X, Y, and Z. Right? So I've just acknowledged that Joe's doing a good job. I've acknowledged that it might be hard for her to take it on board because maybe she's been doing it the same way for a long time. And then I've said to them, my intention is to talk to you about X, Y, and Z so that they're prepared for the conversation. Step 2 is to ask curious questions. So what's a curious question? A curious question is understanding their thinking. As a leader, if I just went in and said, you need to do it this and this and this way, you're missing the calibration. You want to be able to understand why they did what they did so that you can then bridge the gap between their thinking and your thinking. So you might say something like, could you share with me what made you think of it in that way? Or you might say something like, what were your thoughts in regards to choosing this process over that process? Or another one is, what were the reasons that you used blah? So you're gauging where they're at. And they might say, oh, well, I did it this way because so-and-so trained me and that's how they do it. Which is fair enough. They got trained in that way and it's the way that they only know how to do it. So once you've asked these curious questions, you really want to make sure that you're listening to understand rather than to be understood. So it's not about asking curious questions and then just telling them your points anyway. It's like, oh, yeah, of course you would do it that way because that's how you were trained. Or they might say something like, oh, it's a really annoying process because all the information is already in the system. So why would I write their names and all of their information on that piece of paper when it's already in the system? And then you're like, oh yeah, of course. I can see why that seems like doubling up on the work. Or I see why you would have thought about it that way. So you're gauging their thinking and able to expand on that thinking by asking more specific questions. Like, oh, okay, so who specifically trained you? Or what was it that you learned from them? So it's a conversation, right? And the next part is to identify what you think would be the best way and own that. But you don't want to say, this is the way to do it. But in a more subtle way, saying that there is another way to do it, but you're saying, from my point of view, because remember that we all see life through a lens, a filter, depending on the conditioning of our upbringing and the experience that we had. We can never assume that our way is the right way. Based on what I know to be true right now, this is how I would do that. And they might say, okay, well, that doesn't work because X, Y, and Z. But then you're open to that conversation and prepared for there to be another way. But if I was giving the direct feedback, I'd say, in my opinion, this is the way that works best for our system because of X, Y, and Z. And so you're owning that it's your opinion and then giving them feedback. So does that kind of make sense? Where you're not thinking this is the way it has to be done, but you're allowing there to be space to be corrected. And then if the situation is grave or more immediate to be changed, you want to talk to them about the standards of the company. And if you don't have these standards clear, that's a whole new conversation. But you want to be able to say to them, hey, in this company, what we do is we make sure that we do X, Y, and Z because blah, blah, blah. So setting the standard for them helps them have clarity. And remember that they don't know what they don't know. So maybe they didn't even know that that was a standard. So when you're saying that these are the standards and you're sort of setting those expectations, you're putting your foot down and saying, this is the way that it needs to happen from now on. And then they'll have clarity of what needs to happen. And you want to make sure that you're checking in. So the last part is, can we agree on this? Because you want that emotional buy-in. You don't want to just give someone feedback and then let them leave your office and they haven't committed to changing their behavior, right? So step 1, acknowledge them, acknowledge their process. Step 2, ask curious questions to open up the conversation. Step 3 is giving feedback the way that you see it. And step 4 is the emotional buy-in, asking a question to make sure that they are committed to making the changes. So I trust that this was a really important message for your Friday. I'm Danny Ferrier. Please comment below if you have any questions, and I'd love to hear your experience of how you are having challenging conversations. Bye for now.